Imagine this. You are standing at your window on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in July 1518. The summer heat is brutal, the kind that makes the air above the street shimmer and the river smell wrong. Your children are hungry. Your grain failed again this spring. You have buried 2 neighbors this month. Then you look down and you see your neighbor, a woman you have known your whole life, dancing alone in the street below. No music, no festival, no reason you can see. She is just dancing. You watch her for an hour. She does not stop. You watch her through the evening. She does not stop. You watch her collapse from exhaustion onto the stones, sleep for a short while with her cheek against the ground, then rise and begin again. Her name is Frau Troffea, and she will dance like this, without music, without rest, without any explanation anyone can give. For 6 days and 6 nights, her feet bleed through her shoes. Her husband begs her to stop. She cannot, or she will not. In 1518, no one in this city can tell you which one it is. Visual. Extreme close-up. A woman's feet. Shoes worn through. Dark stains on cobblestones beneath her, still moving. Night. A single oil lamp from a window above. Silence. By the end of the first week, 34 other people have joined her. By August, that number is 400. By the time it finally ends, the chronicles record up to 15 people dying every single day. Not from plague, not from war, from dancing. This is not a legend. It is documented in city council minutes, physician reports, cathedral sermons, and 6 independent chronicle accounts written while it was still happening. And the most unsettling detail is not the dancing. It is what the city decided to do about it. Because they did try to stop it. Every single time they intervened, they made it dramatically, catastrophically worse. Chapter 1. A city already breaking. To understand why 400 people danced themselves to the edge of death in the summer of 1518, you need to understand what Strasbourg already was before a single person stepped onto those cobblestones. Strasbourg was a prosperous free city inside the Holy Roman Empire, wealthy by medieval standards, with a great Gothic cathedral, river trade, printing presses, guilds. From the outside, it looked like a city in good health. From the inside, it had been quietly breaking for years. Historian John Waller, who wrote the most comprehensive modern study of this event, describes Strasbourg in the years before 1518 as a city experiencing what he calls brutal years, overlapping catastrophe, stacking on top of overlapping catastrophe. Floods had swallowed the lower city. Unusually severe cold killed the harvests, 2 seasons running. The year, 1516 to 1517, became known simply as the bad year, a phrase that needed no further explanation for anyone who had lived through it. Smallpox was moving through the population. Syphilis, so new that people still called it the French pox and had no idea how it spread, had arrived in Europe a generation earlier and was killing without pattern or logic, and always in the background, the collective memory of the Black Death, which had visited this region within living grandparents' memory. Peasant uprisings were breaking out in the surrounding countryside. 3 consecutive years of famine had pushed people past the point where fear could be managed quietly. And in 1517, just 1 year before the dancing began, Martin Luther had challenged the Catholic Church, and the religious certainties that had structured everyday life for 1,000 years were beginning to crack open. Waller has a specific phrase for what Strasbourg was in July 1518. He says the population had been primed. Primed the way a city is primed when years of hunger, disease, grief, and religious terror have built up inside it with nowhere to go. Primed for something to break. And then, on an ordinary hot afternoon, something did. Chapter 2. She begins, and cannot stop. The historical record gives us her name, and almost nothing else. Frau Troffea. Whether Troffea is a family name or a garbled transcription of something else, historians are not entirely certain. We know she was a married woman. We know she lived in Strasbourg. We know her husband was present when it began. What we do not know, what no one has been able to determine in 5 centuries, is why she started. The most detailed surviving accounts describe her stepping into the street in mid-July 1518, in the heat of the day, and simply beginning to dance. There was no music playing. There was no celebration or festival. She danced with the frenzied, repetitive, jerking motion that contemporaries called choreomania, uncontrolled, compulsive movement that the dancer could neither predict nor halt. Her husband's pleas did not stop her. Her own bleeding feet did not stop her. She danced for 6 days and 6 nights, collapsing to sleep on the cobblestones and rising to dance again. Then the first other person joined her, then another, and another. Within 4 days there were 34 dancers. Within a month, contemporary sources place the number as high as 400, though historians note medieval chroniclers sometimes rounded upward. The minimum figure most modern scholars accept is several hundred. What is not in dispute? They danced without stopping, without music, without apparent intention, in the full heat of a Strasbourg summer. Many stopped eating entirely. Many stopped sleeping. Several sources describe dancers whose shoes had worn through completely, whose feet left blood on the stones behind them, who continued to dance through the injury as if they could not feel it. Their faces, the chronicles note, were not joyful. They were rigid, anguished, somewhere between a trance and a waking nightmare. And here is the detail that separates this story from everything else you might assume about it. The majority of modern historians believe these people were not faking. They were not performing. They were genuinely, physically unable to stop. But the city of Strasbourg had to do something, and what they chose to do next is the part of this story that should genuinely disturb you. Chapter 3. The city decides to help, and makes it catastrophically worse. The City Council of Strasbourg was not a body that ignored problems. By the standards of 1518 civic governance, Strasbourg's authorities were unusually well organized and active. When the dancing spread past a handful of people and into a crowd that was clearly suffering, they convened, they consulted, they acted. The physicians examined the dancers and reached their diagnosis: hot blood. This was the most advanced medical framework available in 1518. Rooted in ancient Greek humoral medicine, the theory that the body's health depended on the balance of 4 fluids, the doctors reasoned that the summer heat had overheated the blood and uncontrolled movement was the result. The treatment for overheated blood was simple: sweat it out. Give the fever what it wants. Let the heat exhaust itself through motion. The city council followed this advice precisely. They cleared Strasbourg's guild halls and open market spaces. They built wooden stages in the public squares so the dancers would have flat, open surfaces to move on. They hired professional musicians to accompany them. They hired professional dancers to join the afflicted and help keep them moving. Read that again slowly. The city of Strasbourg, watching hundreds of its citizens dance themselves toward heart failure and stroke, decided that the correct response was to hire a band. The result was exactly what you would expect, and exactly what the city council did not anticipate. The music drew crowds. The stages drew onlookers. People who had been watching from doorways stepped forward and joined in. The number of dancers grew. The deaths continued. One chronicle estimates up to 15 people dying per day at the outbreak's peak, from heart attacks, from strokes, from sheer physical exhaustion. Historians debate the exact numbers, but what every source agrees on is this: people were dying, the dancing was spreading, and the city's intervention was making both of these things worse. Realizing, too late, that the physicians' approach had catastrophically backfired, the council reversed course. They dismissed the musicians. They tore down the stages. They banned public dancing and music throughout the entire city, not just for the afflicted, but for every single citizen of Strasbourg, under threat of fine. The city that had built a stage for its dying dancers now made it illegal for anyone to move to music at all. But the dancers were still dancing, and the city had run out of medical ideas entirely. So they turned to the only explanation left in 1518, the one that, in its own strange way, would actually work. Chapter 4. The Saint, the Red Shoes, and the Mountain. When the medical response failed completely, the city's interpretation of events shifted toward the only other framework that made sense in 1518: divine punishment. The explanation that took hold was built around St. Vitus, a Catholic martyr believed across the Rhine Valley to possess one very specific and terrifying power: the ability to curse sinners with compulsive, unstoppable dancing. This was not a fringe belief. It was widely held, deeply embedded in the religious culture of this exact region. And historian John Waller points out something that is almost certainly not a coincidence. Every known dancing epidemic in Europe between 1374 and 1518 occurred in the Rhine Valley, the precise area where the St. Vitus curse belief was strongest. The geography of the outbreaks matches the geography of the belief almost exactly. If you believed, and in 1518 you almost certainly did, that St. Vitus could punish sin by forcing people to dance uncontrollably, then what was happening in the streets of Strasbourg had a clear meaning. God was angry, the city had sinned, and only divine intervention could lift the curse. The council organized masses at Strasbourg's great cathedral. They shut down the city's gambling establishments and brothels, sources of sin that might have provoked St. Vitus's anger. And then they issued the instruction that is the strangest detail in this entire story. The dancers were to be given red shoes. The shoes were blessed with holy water. Crosses were painted on both the top and sole of each pair. Each dancer was required to hold a small cross in their hands. Incense was burned. Priests conducted ceremonies in Latin over the afflicted. And then the dancers who had already been moved to the outskirts of the city were loaded, still dancing, still unable to stop, into wagons and transported to the shrine of St. Vitus in the town of Saverne, a full day's ride into the Vosges Mountains, the shrine where the curse could theoretically be lifted, where repentance and prayer might release them from whatever held them. Frau Troffea herself, the woman who had started it all, was among those sent to Saverne. What happened at the shrine is not fully recorded. What we know is that in the days following the pilgrimages to Saverne, the number of active dancers in Strasbourg began to fall. By September 1518, roughly 2 months after Frau Troffea had first stepped into the street, the plague was over. The streets were quiet. The stages had been dismantled. The musicians had gone home. Whether St. Vitus had intervened or whether something else had ended it, nobody in Strasbourg in September 1518 could say. 500 years later, we are still not entirely sure. Chapter 5. What actually happened, and why it still matters. 5 centuries of scholarship have never produced a definitive explanation for the dancing plague of 1518. But they have narrowed it down considerably. The ergot theory, that the dancers consumed rye bread contaminated with a hallucinogenic fungus, sounds compelling at first. Ergot does cause convulsions and involuntary movement, but it also causes vasoconstriction and gangrene. It does not produce the sustained, complex, coordinated dancing that witnesses in Strasbourg, described for days and weeks at a time. Ergot poisoning collapses people. It does not make them dance. The deliberate performance theory, that the dancers were members of a religious sect using ecstatic movement to seek divine favor, requires us to dismiss almost every eyewitness account simultaneously. The city's own physicians, the cathedral clergy, the city council records, and 6 independent chronicles all describe the dancers as suffering, not celebrating. Their faces were described as anguished. Frau Troffea's husband's desperate attempts to stop her are recorded by people who clearly believed she did not want to be dancing. The explanation that fits, the one accepted by the overwhelming majority of modern historians, is mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria, though that term is now considered imprecise. Mass psychogenic illness is a documented, recurring real phenomenon. It occurs when physical symptoms spread socially through a population under extreme collective stress. It has been recorded in modern times. In 2011 in Leroy, New York, teenage girls in a school began developing tic disorders that spread from person to person with no physical cause, and stopped when the social conditions changed. It has been documented in schools, factories, and communities across dozens of countries in the 20th and 21st centuries. Historian John Waller's argument is built on several pieces of evidence that fit together almost perfectly. First, Strasbourg, in 1518, was experiencing exactly the kind of catastrophic overlapping stress, famine, disease, political collapse, religious upheaval that triggers mass psychogenic illness. Second, the St. Vitus curse belief gave the population a specific cultural script for what breakdown looked like, and the brain, under sufficient pressure, performs exactly the script it has been given. Third, every dancing epidemic in European history between 1374 and 1518 occurred in the Rhine Valley, precisely the region where that script, the St. Vitus curse, was most deeply embedded. Waller describes the dancers as being in a genuine trance state, a form of dissociation in which the conscious mind partially withdraws, the body loses its normal pain and exhaustion signals, and the individual enters a feedback loop of movement they cannot voluntarily interrupt. They dance through bleeding feet and physical collapse, not because they chose to ignore the pain, but because in that trance state they could not fully perceive it. And here is the piece of this story that most people miss entirely, the piece that makes it more than a medieval curiosity. This was not the first time it happened. Historians have documented roughly 20 comparable mass dancing episodes across Europe between 1200 and 1600, almost all in the Rhine Valley. The last historically recorded dancing epidemic was not in medieval Europe at all. It was in Madagascar in 1863. Different continent, different century, different religion, same pattern, which means the conditions that produce mass psychogenic illness, sustained collective stress, a shared cultural framework for what crisis looks like, and a social environment where symptoms can spread from person to person, are not uniquely medieval. They are not specific to the Rhine Valley or to St. Vitus or to 1518. They are human. The city of Strasbourg hired a band to play for its dying dancers. It built wooden stages for them. It made the crisis catastrophically worse because it did not understand what it was actually looking at. But here is the question that stays with you long after the chronicle entries go quiet. If Frau Troffea were to step out of her door today, in a city under comparable pressure, comparable fear, comparable collective grief, would we understand what we were looking at any better? Or would we, in our own way, hire the band?